I have seen the expansion of oversight both in prevalence and scope over this time. With that said, it is only in the last several years that we have seen how important and impactful the role of community oversight has been. Community oversight, in its most simplistic definition, is community actors bringing attention to the problems, systemic issues, in this case, the criminal justice system. They, through varying methods, demand to be part of a larger conversation. And one thing I've learned is that a well-rounded and effective conversation about civilian oversight and police accountability cannot happen without both those involved in civilian oversight and those involved around and alongside it. Those working to bring attention to accountability and reform, those working to bring creative solutions to the table, and those working to safeguard human rights. These 3 points are why I believe community oversight has become so important. We've seen the emergence of those outside of traditional oversight mechanisms come forth in such a way to bring attention, create action, and affect change. Today, we have 3 people who are doing these very things. They are in many ways causing a dialogue that, although it is often difficult, is proven continuously necessary. Because the bios are included in the packet that you received this morning, I won't waste any time with those and get down to what we really need to discuss. And that is hearing about their work and how it plays into the emerging and intensified role of community oversight. First, I will have the pleasure of welcoming Brittany Packnett of CampaignZero and BlackLivesMatter. We will then hear from Steve Silverman, founder of Lecture Rights. And last but not least, we will hear from Nahal Zamani of the Center for Constitutional Rights. With that, Brittany.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me. You don't really need to read my bio if you don't want to. I will tell you the important things you need to know, not just about me, but that will help you frame why I'm about to say what I'm going to say. First and foremost, I'm an educator. I used to teach 3rd grade here in Southeast DC, and I run an education nonprofit, and so I therefore believe in the humanity and the dignity of every single child. And that comes with the knowledge that my organization places teachers in my hometown of St. Louis in the very high school that Michael Brown graduated from. I was an appointee, or am an appointee to the 2 most discussed task forces or commissions coming out of this. So when people talk about it, I'm like, oh yeah, that was it. So I was an appointee to the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, and I also still sit on the Ferguson Commission, which sunsets at the end of the year in our current iteration. But the most important thing to know about me is that I'm a protester. And so on August the 10th, I went out with a number of other people from my community, some of whom I knew, some of whom I had never met before in my life, in order to help provide the oversight that had not been there, and that unfortunately in our community continues to not be there. And that on that day, I went out following an evening where German Shepherds were brought out into a completely peaceful community to keep the peace, even though the peace was already set. In a historically African-American community, obviously, police bringing out dogs is not a very welcome thing. And when I asked the Deputy Ferguson Police Chief why that was the decision that was made, his response to me was, well, did anyone die? And so that was the day that I found out that that was the only standard by which they were operating, and I continued to come out every single day after that. I'm also a protester who, when I sat on that task force, was told by the head of a national police professional development or professional organization, when I specifically asked if the police and the community had the same amount of responsibility in this, even though the police is a public servant, I was told that the police actually had no additional responsibility, despite the fact that it is biblical that to whom much is given, much is required, and the fact that police derive their power from the people. And so, as a former public servant myself, I take that additional responsibility very seriously. And so I come to you as someone who has worked for a long time in policy, worked in education, but also I come to you as a protester. And so that is why I'm really proud to be a part of CampaignZero. I am here also, my colleague Sam Sinyangwe, who is one of the 4 folks who helped launch this. He's a brilliant data scientist. We put together CampaignZero because we wanted something that would help meet the intersection between protest and policy. Right? We are very clear, as are many, many folks on the ground in cities all across America right now, that it is not one or the other that will solve this, right? But we would be remiss if we thought that we would be having this conversation or that there ever would have been a task force, et cetera, had it not been for protest. The protest cannot end, right? The full exercising of democracy to hold public servants, including law enforcement, accountable cannot end. And so we're at a point now where we want to make sure that while the more informal or organic protest and accountability continues, we also want to see structures that are built to ensure that that accountability and oversight is continual, is rigorous, and is protected. What I will say before I get into this is that while I'm going to zero in on this topic of oversight and accountability, we fully believe that the 10 policy platform ideas above cannot be done in a vacuum, right? So one can't be done without the other. That is why we've got all of these things. And we recognize full well that there are plenty of things that are not on here that are left to discuss, right? There are issues of mass incarceration. There are issues of building safe communities from the ground up and not just policing them from the top down. And actually, as an aside, I know that when I walked in earlier, there was a conversation happening about sometimes the conflicting recommendations or desires that can come from the community. What I think is really important to realize is that marginalized people, oppressed people, as we've been dealing with systems that are rooted in white supremacy, we often get told things that we will convince ourselves are true. So it is a racialized notion that more police in Black and brown communities is what's going to lead to greater safety instead of better education, higher employment, et cetera. A lot of times we believe those things and continue to perpetuate those myths because nobody has told us that that's not true. So as a protester, as a community member, as a teacher, I am incredibly interested in what safety looks like in my community because in Georgetown, nobody talks about filling the streets with police like they do in Anacostia, right? And so I want to make sure that we're having a conversation about safety that even goes beyond CampaignZero about how to build strong communities from the ground up, especially when those communities have suffered from oppression. But back to this platform, so the 4 of us put this together with a number of different vantage points. We talked to community members, activists, and protesters around the country. We also did a great deal of research and looked at the amount of work that has been done, quite honestly, by some folks in this room to make sure that we're being inclusive of all of the best thinking and best practices out there. And we also looked at the report coming out of the 21st Century Policing Task Force to inform these particular areas. So, you know, if nothing else, protest is not just intentional confrontation to create discomfort and ensure that people are aware of what's going on and are aware of their own oppression and the oppression that is being heaped on others, but it is direct accountability, right? So again, we want to make sure that that's extended in a formal way as it also continues in the streets in a more organic way. So if you could push to the second tab, great, thank you. So one of our areas, our second bucket area, is indeed community oversight. The research that we did suggested that there should be 2 strands of this policy oversight. Forgive me if I'm repeating anything that's been said from the earlier panel. I know that some of these ideas have already been discussed. But our recommendation is that there is both a police commission and actually a civilian complaints office, right? And so among other attributes, scroll down a little bit more. Thank you. That's perfect. Among other attributes, we believe that this commission should have full subpoena, investigative, and discipline power, right? So we know that even though communities are still becoming aware of what good civilian oversight looks like, we know that we want civilian oversight with teeth. We also know that we want to make sure that there's more than just community input, but that there's actual community decision making. So when I was at our last Ferguson Commission meeting, and we were discussing implementation and the formal pathways we were going to leverage moving forward, and it was time for public comment. And one of the leaders of one of our justice organizations, one of our grassroots organizations in the region said, you know, there was an organization that was presenting that said, we want to make sure that we hear the voice of the community. And he said, I'm really not interested in you hearing my voice. I'm interested in making decisions that will affect me and my family, right? And so we have to make sure that we don't allow engagement just to be us imparting our agenda on other people and putting a community face on it. We have to make sure that input isn't just listening to people and saying, oh, that's nice, and then going on and doing what we were going to do anyway. We actually have to continue to give the power to the people and make sure that the community has a real opportunity to make decisions. And so this idea, this mission is centered around that. We also want those roles to be full-time roles with competitive salaries, to this idea that people are there to really commit their whole selves and make real decisions. Lastly, we want to make sure that this particular commission has the opportunity not only to make recommendations to the mayor to hire the police chief, but also has the opportunity to evaluate and recommend the firing of a police chief. Right? So when we talk about real decision-making power, those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. When we move from the police commission to a complaints office, we want to make sure that community members are hearing from this particular office, that office is maintaining real records, and where they make recommendations that the chief decides not to follow, that particular office has the power to make a different call. For both the commission and the complaints office, what we recommend is that the members of both of these offices actually are untied to law enforcement. So our desire is that these folks actually are not former officers, don't have family members that are current or former officers, because we want to make sure that the independence of those bodies is maintained. Go to the next one. Thank you. So our 10th bucket item is about fair police union contracts, and for a lot of people it is the most curious section, because if you just look at it, people are saying, wait a minute, I thought you were activists, I'm confused. When you read a little bit closer, one of the things that we have done in a project that we launched just a couple of days ago is look very closely at how the union contract can be a barrier to oversight and accountability. It is often the most overlooked piece, and I want to be very clear. I am the child of I'm the granddaughter, rather, of union members. I was a member of the Washington Teachers Union. I fully believe in collective bargaining and the power of the employee. But I also know that if we allow unions to be a barrier to the kind of justice that communities deserve, then we have a real problem on our hands. And so, thank you very much. So there's a website that, in conjunction with join CampaignZero.org, it's called checkthepolice.org. And the latest project that we released, thank you very much. That's perfect. The latest project that we released is our findings from a collection of, was it 50? It was 100, thank you. Of our FOIA request of 100 different major metropolitan police union contracts. And when we looked at that, and Sam did a lot of this work, so feel free to chime in here, Sam. When we looked very closely at that, these are the 4 things that we found were really consistent across most of those that were major barriers to accountability and oversight. This first piece being that there are often mechanisms that prevent police from being interrogated immediately or even effectively. The second being that often information about past misconduct is wiped from the record, in some cases as quickly as 6 months. The third is that there are certain kinds of complaints that are misqualified, and those are purged sometimes even more quickly. And fourth, that there's a limit to this piece about civilian oversight. And I want to make sure that we're making the connection, as was made earlier, between the ability to obtain and review documents and civilian oversight. like I said about those first 10 things, none of those can happen independently, neither can these 4, right? So taking on these issues in the collective bargaining process is going to be incredibly important, because there are lots of times we have found where police unions are actually subverting FOIA and state-level sunshine laws in order to ensure, quite frankly, that justice is not fully served. And so when we see cases like what's happening in Chicago right now, this is a prime example. And actually we highlight their particular union contract on this website, so you can look a little bit closer. So that is a really brief overview of what we are doing. But I do want to reemphasize the fact that, if you go back to the first tab, actually, thank you. Like I said, CampaignZero is dedicated to this intersection of protest and policy, knowing full well that one should not operate without the other. And so if you look closer at the site, we're not only providing research and this policy platform, we are also really attempting to educate the voter. We're attempting to educate the community. And so we have a tracker of folks who are running on all sides for the office of the president in 2016 to show people exactly how those candidates are tracking toward these particular things. What commitments have they made, what commitments have they not made, what things that they said they will not do on this list, because we want to make sure that the people are truly informed beyond what they've been told. And so I will stop there, because I'm very interested to hear what my fellow panelists have to say, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you for waking me up. In July 2007, Edward Nance, an African-American cable company employee and part-time high school referee, was pulled over by 2 officers in Chicago's South Side. Nance had no criminal record, but he was stopped because he didn't have a front license plate. Things quickly turned badly for him. When Nance asked the officers why they pulled him over, the first officer told him to get the fuck out of the car. The next officer slammed his head on the car, causing injuries to his neck and face. That second officer also forcibly handcuffed Nance, jerking his arms back violently, injuring tendons in his shoulders as well as one rotator cuff. Nance required 2 shoulder surgeries to repair that damage. About 2 years later, a federal jury found the officers had used excessive force. They awarded Nance $350,000 in damages for his injuries. The judge then ordered the city to pay an additional $180,000 to cover Nance's legal fees. However, Chicago's Independent Police Review Authority found all allegations against the 2 officers to be unsustained due to a lack of evidence about the precise cause of the complainant's injuries. Neither officer was disciplined. On October 20th, 2014, police dash cam footage captured Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke firing 16 shots at 17-year-old Laquan McDonald, who was armed with a 3-inch blade. We now know about this story despite the bad faith efforts by the city of Chicago to block the release of that horrible video, which then forced them to finally bring first-degree murder charges against Officer Van Dyke, who just so happens to be the same officer who violently handcuffed Edward Nance back in 2007. When he heard about this connection, Nance burst into tears. He said, "Makes me feel like this could have been me. If they had done something about this cop in my case, this young boy would still be alive." We now know that during Van Dyke's 14-year career, at least 20 civilian complaints have been filed against him. Most of them involved allegations of excessive force, and at least one complaint alleges he used a racial slur. None of these complaints led to any disciplinary action. But we only know about Van Dyke's complaint history because this, too, was just made available last month. And this is thanks to the wonderful work of a nonprofit called the Invisible Institute, which collaborated with lawyers at the University of Chicago Law School. They uploaded a massive public data set that includes 56,000 allegations of misconduct filed against 8,500 Chicago police officers between May 2001 and September 2015. This data set is called the Citizens Police Data Project. And if you go to their website, you can actually enter Jason Van Dyke's name into the search box, and you'll instantly see details of those 20 complaints. This is a very important model for how this sort of open police complaints data can be used and visualized. And that website, again, for those of you who are writing this down, is cpdp.co. But it's a scandal in and of itself that it required a platoon of public interest attorneys, 10 years worth of litigation and FOIA requests to force the city to finally cough up this data. But this sort of institutional secrecy is hardly unique to Chicago. Secrecy is a feature of state and local policing agencies across the country. So it's no surprise that wherever we find departments whose workings are cloaked in secrecy, this is where we also find some of the darkest acts of police misconduct that are being ignored and covered up by authorities. The good news is that we are now in the dawn of a golden age of police data collection. This is powered by the openness of the internet. The Chicago data is the most beautiful example of the power of this openness. And just having access to this open public data is accelerating a national movement towards building a universal common language for how we can define and categorize policing data from all across the country. It's also helping us to better identify best practices for how departments should respond to civilian complaints. Here's my vision for the future of police complaints. I believe that we are moving towards a world with universal, real-time access to civilian police complaints data. This real-time data will be shared directly by the complainants themselves, who will be able to control who has access to their confidential and personal information. Real-time police complaints data will be accessible to community groups who are promoting equitable policing practices. This data will be accessible to civil rights attorneys who are identifying departments with patterns and practices of police misconduct. Real-time civilian complaints data will become an increasingly important management tool for conscientious police chiefs who are working to build community-oriented policing cultures. For NACOLE members, real-time police complaints will allow us to spend less time collecting, organizing, interpreting handwritten paper complaints, because instead, we'll be able to spend more time investigating the most critical excessive force complaints. This will improve police accountability outcomes by making it easier to identify and hold officers with chronic misbehavior problems accountable before they become involved in a deadly but avoidable use of force incident. Now, what I'm about to show you is the first prototype of the Open Police Complaints web application that my organization is building. This service will be free to users. The data we collect will be open to the public, except for certain personally identifiable information provided by the complainants themselves. The interface that you're going to see is kind of modeled after TurboTax, but instead of helping you with your tax returns, we're streamlining police complaints. And in the simulation, you're going to see two sides of the screen. On the left side will be a scenario from our most recent film called 10 Rules for Dealing with Police. This is a stop and frisk scenario. But on the right, you're going to see how the young man in that scenario might use the service later that day to file a complaint. Please launch the test. Music by the Flaming Lips. Audio? I'm not excited about this.
Yes. Al 30 minutos llego. A las 5 de eso, tenía el extenso. Simón, el primero. Vamos, voy a la tarde. Voy. Ok, va.
Hey, put him on the car. What? Where's he go, man? Come on, give it up.
I ain't got nothing.
Let me see your pocket. Come on. Your ID?
Got an idea here.
Run that, please. See you there.
coming out of there?
The afternoon drug spot.
It's my home. That's where I live at. You go to school or you working?
I work at a restaurant, that's where I'm going. He's clean. Good stuff.
Thank you for your cooperation. You stay out of trouble.
This is not the first time. It probably ain't the last.
As you can see, what's happening is we're allowing the complainant to reveal their allegations rather than giving them an exhaustive list to pick from or the ability to sort of make up their own allegations so that the allegations will be more accurate. And what it reveals is a perfect police complaint. Before we did any coding on this work, my team spent about 8 months just designing the back end of our relational database model. We wanted to make sure that every single one of our data structures, this includes all the people, the types of people, the places, the things, all the types of events we capture, these all need to be aligned with the most universal categories and definitions for building a national police complaints model. Now, I'm not going to bore you by giving you an exhaustive list of all the research that I've done, but suffice it to say, I've read every Department of Justice report on police civilian context I could find. I've read every recent annual report from every major civilian oversight agency that puts out a report. And I've been working with some of the top experts in the field of police oversight, including practitioners like Christian Klosner, who I thought was going to be here, but apparently he is no longer the head of the Office of police complaints in D.C. But when I met with him just a few months back, he really helped me appreciate some of the challenges of collecting complaints within the constraints of the existing D.C. laws. But for example, the district requires that complaints be submitted on the official district form, and it must include the complainant's signature in order to be investigated by their office. These sorts of technical challenges are things we're going to have to reconcile with all the municipalities that have these sorts of laws, oftentimes because of these collective bargaining agreements that Brittany brings up. But in my opinion, these sorts of laws, they block otherwise legitimate complaints from being investigated, and so they're part of the problem. But even this discussion, it really brings up the question of if we're going to try to become the national open police complaint system, how are we going to deal with all the complaints we receive, including the inevitable flood of malicious and fraudulent complaints? It's probably the most common question I get. Well, first, our design is just going to help us because the process of completing one of these complaints requires a moderate investment in users' time, the same way that TurboTax isn't just something that takes like 2 minutes. Each and every question is simple to answer, but there are probably more questions on this than a casual troll who wants to submit a malicious police complaint to our system will probably be willing to answer. But if they're persistent, we have the second line of defense, which is that every single complaint we receive will be by trained human administrators. We're going to publicly launch open police complaints through the web app sometime in early 2016. And before we do, we're going to need to hire some staff who can sort out these malicious and these abusive complaints Also, just lots of people submit complaints that have nothing to do with complaints against the police. People submit complaints about, their boss or their landlord. We're going to need human eyes to sort these out and not have them be part of this data set. We're also going to need staffers to sort out what I call fantastical complaints. Anyone who has been on the front line of sorting through complaints understands at a certain degree are going to fit into that category. All of these types of complaints I just described will not be made available to the public and will never then be emailed to our civilian oversight or internal affairs contacts, at least not through our system, because we don't want to waste investigators' time. We only want to send investigators complaints that are actually investigatable. So if a complaint includes a police incident with a single place and time, if that incident includes one or more allegations against one or more officers in a particular department, that complaint will become public. And it will be also automatically emailed to our civilian oversight contacts if we have one. And if we don't have a civilian oversight contact, we will email to an internal affairs contact if the complainant wants this to be part of the process. Some police departments will probably get upset about these open complaints, but the best way they can respond to them is by simply investigating them in a timely manner and being open about these proceedings, because as Edward Vance's story proves to us, police complaints are too important to be kept in the dark. Like I said, we're going to be doing a soft launch of OPC beginning in early 2016. In the meantime, if anyone here has any questions, concerns, or crises about this work, you can talk to me here. If you want to keep updated on our progress, you can subscribe to our email newsletter at flexyourrights.org. Send an email about like once every 2 weeks and once, pretty low volumes. You can also just pass me your business card and I'll add you to our list. And of course, if you want to contribute your time, your talent, or your treasure to this effort, please talk to me. Thanks so much.
Hey everyone, I'm Nahal. I'm with the Center for Constitutional Rights. We're based in New York, but we work across the U.S. and the world. We're a legal and human rights and advocacy organization working to uphold the Constitution and values enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We've been around since the Civil Rights Movement, supporting activists there, and we have attempted to use our organization's resources to bolster and augment calls by activists in social justice movements and communities who are targeted by the government or corporations for who they are and for exercising their rights. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of our work in New York around policing, because one, that's been hella active, and two, I think some of the lessons that we're learning in the New York context come from best practices and lessons learned from other communities across the world and within the U.S. And then maybe I'll free up time, I'll finish off with some lessons learned along the way that I've just jotted on the corner of my paper. We're always learning lessons. So I wanted to do an overview of what's been kicking off, some of the things that have been kicking off in New York in the last couple of years, and of course, I'm going to probably not do justice to all of the work of our partners, both in the room and across the world, and of course in New York, who've been working on the issue of police abuse and police violence and police brutality and misconduct for many, many decades. But I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of some of the work that my organization is involved in. The first thing I wanted to talk to you all is about a really vibrant campaign called Communities United for Police Reform. My organization is one of the founding members of that campaign, and that is a really awesome campaign. You might have heard of it because they made stop and frisk a mayoral issue in New York City back in when our mayor was getting elected. You might have heard of it because that campaign, along with City Council in New York, was responsible for passing one of the most comprehensive profiling bans in the country at that time, and introducing an office of the Inspector General. That campaign was really pivotal in many of the protests that took place starting about a year ago yesterday when we got news about the failure to indict the killer of Eric Garner. So Community United for Police Reform, or CPR, is a playful play on the so-called logo of the NYPD, which is Community Professional Women's Respect. In face of many of the abuses and discriminatory practices and violence incurred by that police department. And that campaign was designed to bring together researchers and activists and lawyers and community students that targeted the NYPD for who they were for decades at a time to change the structure and the way that the NYPD was policing and empower the communities that have been dealing with the brunt of those abusive practices for many years. So the campaign is multi-pronged, a lot of active concurrent strategies. We agree that we have to do many of these things at the same time. We issued cutting-edge research, which debunked the myth that stop and frisk was effective as a policing practice, and really put forth the fact that it was a racially discriminatory practice. We built a fabulous Know Your Rights curriculum that is being practiced across the city so that New Yorkers know and exercise their rights when they can. We have a network of cop watchers across the city, and thousands have been trained and are continuing to hold the police accountable by exercising their rights to document police abuse. And we have a number of legislative priorities. 2 of them we passed, a couple more are coming down the pipe, but the 2 that we passed, because we love talking about wins, are we introduced an office of the Inspector General of the NYPD, and the head of that office actually came from PC. And we expanded and added teeth to our ban on profiling. So before, you couldn't really profile if you were a member of the NYPD. It goes on the basis of the basic kind of parameters of what we think of as typical forms of discrimination, so nationality, ethnicity, origin. And we were like, that's not really how it goes down with policing. I mean, people are targeted because they're young, people are targeted because they're queer, because they're gender non-conforming, because they're perceived to be living in public housing, they're homeless, because of their immigration status. And this can be the actual, all of those actual statuses, or this can be the perception on the part of the police officer. So we wanted to take our profiling ban and expand it to encompass all the categories of people that are targeted for who they are by the police. And we also wanted to add teeth to it. We wanted people to have actionable ways that they could enforce that profiling ban. Because we know if things are written on paper, or even in the Constitution, they're not always abided by. So I'm very happy that those 2 survived many, many challenges. Even the mayor, the former mayor, saying that he would employ his own personal pockets and resources to shut those bills down. And those are now entered into law and active. And that was really the work of this campaign coming together, which was a lot of fucking hours and decades of work. So I just want to be real about that. We had a competition for who would say fuck first today. Anyways, so that was the work of the campaign. Because that campaign was so strong in building the leadership of effective communities, effective communities led the campaign. They are the face of the campaign, and people like me are the supporters. We work together with effective communities to make sure they have the resources, they are fully funded, and they are the ones that are driving the change that we want to see. And that's the philosophy that my organization tries to employ. Not perfectly, but we attempt to do that. We are predominantly folks that organize and lawyers, and we get together and we try to support fights for justice wherever they're occurring and whenever we think we can be helpful in those situations. So in 1999, after the aftermath of Amadou Diallo, our community-based partners came to us and were like, we're going to take care of these streets, you need to file a lawsuit. And that was because there was a roving unit of the NYPD at the time called the Street Crime Unit that was responsible for the death of Diallo and for a whole host of other abusive practices. One of those abusive practices was their abuse of stop and frisk. Back in '99, people were talking about stop and frisk, and a lot of folks like the CCRB, the Attorney General's office, and community-based partners knew all too well what stop and frisk. But it wasn't really the tip of the iceberg, It wasn't being made fun of on the Daily Show quite yet. But people were actively fighting this form of abuse that the NYPD was releasing. So we sued the NYPD, I'm fast forwarding, about 15 years right now, Several years later, we settled with them. We got more public reporting about how the NYPD was using stop and frisk. The street crimes unit, in the aftermath of our lawsuit, was disbanded. We got a profiling ban. Again, that was on the books, but as I said, it wasn't strong enough. And unfortunately, in the years since, the NYPD ramped up their use of stop and frisk. So we went back to court. We went back to court with our community-based partners who made up our plaintiffs and our witnesses. We filed a federal class action lawsuit against the entire department, not just district and unit. And we successfully proved after 9 weeks in trial that they had been violating New York rights. And this was a federal judge's recognition of something that we had all known for many, many years. And what I think was really awesome is that what the judge did, after some convincing, was she didn't come out with a scroll, right? These are the 782 things that NYPD must change. And if they don't change it, they're not going to be compliant with my order. What she said was, I have found and discovered a very damning picture of how policing is being constitutional. And I'm very disturbed. And this, of course, violates the Constitution. And off the top of my head, I'm going to name the 15 or so things, quick fixes that I think you really need to fix right now. She said that. And she said for the rest of the stuff that needs to get fixed, and she went into hundreds of pages of detail about all of the things that she found needed to be fixed. I want a collaborative reform process that is going to put together effective communities to define the type of changes that need to be made. And here, that is where we are today. Now, this process formally launched earlier this fall. We are in the midst of it, so it's still taking shape. We're still figuring it out. There is an independent court-appointed facilitator that's overseeing that process. There's also a monitor that's overseeing the whole process of reforming the NYPD with regards to unconstitutional stop and frisk. There's a couple of public activities. We're going to have some town halls, but right now we're in the input gathering stage. The facilitator is running a bunch of focus groups to get New Yorkers to give their input into what reforms should look like. So if this process is done right, it could be groundbreaking. It could be really building on formal models of enshrining community leadership in overseeing police departments and making sure they are brought into compliance with the law, that they're upholding people's dignity, and they are operating very differently from how things have normally been done. So we're in the middle of it. We're kind of in the beginning of it. I'm very hopeful. I'm also have my feet on the ground. I'm with the organization that brought the lawsuit, so we have a formal role there. Community United for Police Reform, that campaign that I mentioned, they have a formal seat at the table, so they're part of an advisory committee advising the facilitator right now. There are other seats at the table, including the NYPD, and including other representatives of law enforcement, and other representatives from communities that have been affected by the process and how it's really practiced on the streets of New York. So we're in the midst of all of this. I think that we've been learning a lot of lessons along the way. We've been talking to a bunch of you around the country to think about what's working in your homes and what's not, so that we hopefully won't replicate those changes. And if it's helpful, I thought maybe we could talk very briefly about kind of what are some of the lessons we've been learning and that are resonating with us as of today, December 5th. Because that's continuous. For one, I think having been part of this campaign and watched it grow, and we need to have the leadership of people that are affected by these practices in every level of overseeing the types of changes that we want to see. We talked earlier in the previous panel, what is it, policy, culture eats policy for lunch? We can have all of the foundational policies in place, and most of the time we don't even have them in place. We're working with a lack of those oversight mechanisms and structures and even basic parameters. But unless they're enacted and overseen by the people that are affected by them, they're never going to mean anything. And the abuses that happened before, and the exploitation that happens before, and the misconduct and brutality that happens will continue without the leadership of effective communities leading it and having oversight. And I don't mean just a consultation or a town hall or one meeting in a place that you consider the hood. I mean really actually that communities are not just being taken as tokens, but they're part of that leadership. Now what that actually means we're still figuring all of that out. You know, we have models of how we think we should be accountable, but translate that into infrastructure that will support that are also held by governmental entities. That's fucking hard. That's great. I got it. So again, we want partnership. I don't think we need consultation. We need something much more meaningful than that. On the idea of training, I mean, everybody loves improved training. I'd love to improve training too, for police departments that violate people's rights. But training isn't always the solution, and it's not the only solution. You can have the best training in the world, but if that's not translated into how police on the street and in people's lives, then that's not going to do anything. And it doesn't do much when young rookies are trained on the most excellent, groundbreaking training developed by the best experts in the country, and then they go out and their supervisors are telling them, scrap that, this is how you got to do what you got to do. Or they're being told, you're not going to get Saturday off because your mother-in-law is coming into town unless you do this many jobs and this many reps. So we have to really translate and be not just satisfied with training changes, although those are helpful. And the same thing with policy. I mean, as I said earlier, we should really think of, I was thinking of maybe policy as scaffolds, but then I was like, maybe thinking it's maybe like a foundation type thing. But again, I think of the foundation as empowered communities that have formal and leadership roles, and they're bolstered, and they're supported and exercised in that leadership, and they're listened to, but they're also heard, right? And that expertise translates into power and decision making. For folks like us, we are often in the world of fighting for so long that we have a vision of the win, but the actual implementation of our win, that's really hard to do. I didn't say it's nothing hard, but it's pretty hard to do. And I think that we have to think about that implementation and monitoring as key, because that's where we fall short. That's when you fight to get a civilian oversight agency in your town, but if they don't have money to work, and if they're not being, community members don't know they exist, and the police isn't thwarting their investigations, they're not doing anything with them, then that is where the actual implementation will fall short. And that will have major ramifications for oversight and accountability, which I think are aims that we all have here. The last two things are around discipline. Police violence will continue to exist for a whole host of reasons. But one of the factors that affects it, not the only one, is the fact that officers are very, very held accountable for the acts that they commit and with the correct degree with correlation for those particular acts. So it doesn't mean that if you kill someone or if you hurt someone or if you physically assault someone that you get trained again. We should think about punishments as they should be enacted by the police department and not thwarted by the police department to really ensure that abuse and misconduct doesn't happen. And the last thing I'll end on is police unions, which all of us talked about earlier, is that, at least in the New York context, the formal police unions, the official police unions, were very, very combative in the work that we were trying to do. They tried to intervene in our lawsuits a whole host of times. They kept saying, oh my God, our members are being harmed by the federal court recognizing that our members violate people's rights. They said our members are being harmed by this profiling ban that you have enacted. We can't discriminate against people's rights. And they were like, our members are being harmed because now we have an oversight agency called the Inspector General sees the policies and practices of the entire department and not just individual members, which all of the other major agencies in New York City that are governmental have independent oversight bodies. So unfortunately, they were very, very combative in trying to usher in those.
Thank you to all three of you for sharing just a little snippet of the work that you've been doing. We have a few minutes for some questions. If there is anyone that, if you could come down to the microphone so that we can pick up the voices on the video, that would be fantastic. And then we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers, and then we're going to break for lunch, for a slightly shortened lunch, to try and catch back up with our day.
Hi, my name is Deanna Howard, and I work for the Police Office. And I want to piggyback on Nahal's comment about how stop and frisk has been satired in the media. I was thinking about former activist Cal Penn, who started with the White House insurrection, and how he was for stop and frisk. But I was thinking about the irony that he played the character Kumar, Kumar White Castle, and that satire stop and frisk a lot about how black men and brown men are stereotyped and stopped and targeted by the police. And I just want to comment on the irony of that, and how this actor, who was a brown man, who could be racially profiled by these officers, but is seen before this issue.
Good morning. My name is Denise Martin. I am the Department of Justice Chief of Accountability and Compliance for the Baltimore Police Department. Something that we started about 2 months ago. Our goal is to institute reform and discipline both ones with all of the whole spectrum of the police department now. Of course, these guys over here tell us that we have to, so try to get on the right path. But my question is something that I struggle with, is, you know, with everything that happened in Baltimore, and I think this can be said about communities across the United States and the world, quite frankly, ensuring that you have the input from the community is 100% necessary. What I struggle with is how to ensure that we get those voices, those people that show up to the same meeting all the time. And we know what those people think. They sit on boards, they come forward. But really want to hear from the disaffected people that are on the margins, those who are oppressed and really actually are the ones that have these negative interactions with the police. Do you all have any suggestions on how to interact and bring those people into the system? Number one, because a lot of them, quite frankly, don't even trust that we're trying to do the right thing. So any help and guidance on that?
I'd be glad to start that off. Know your rights education, I think, is really a very valuable and compelling way of bringing people in the fold. I've been a Know Your Rights educator for 13 years. So the theme you saw there was from a full-length 40-minute Know Your Rights video called 10 Rules for Dealing with the Police. It's completely accessible on YouTube, and it really makes a very powerful community centerpiece. Some folks in Springfield, Illinois, just recently did a PBS. They got a PBS affiliation, and they brought in like the police chief, the mayor, a former federal U.S. Marshal, a criminal defense lawyer, and they played a scene, and then they commented, the folks commented on it, played another scene, the experts commented on it, they played the third scene, comment, and then they opened it up to the audience. And the thing that's so cathartic about it, important, is that instead of just sort of there being a screaming match between the citizens and sort of the officials, they're at least are speaking on the same language, because the video teaches basic constitutional law and what the expectations are. And the cool thing about it is the police will look at it and say, well, some of those officers were a little bit out of bounds, and that wouldn't be tolerated in our department, and we don't encourage that. And it's sort of like the audience members are kind of like, that's kind of BS, because the officers I've experienced maybe even worse than that. But the fact that those officials say those things, that they are respectful of people's rights and they care about the Constitution, to me, even though it can seem like lip service, it's actually in a sense like a promise to do better. And the community also can engage and speak specifically about the specific events. They'll understand the terms like probable cause. They understand basic lessons on, saying, I don't consent to searches, and am I free to go? So everybody learns something from the process, and it's a very civil and educational way. So I highly recommend Know Your Rights education in some format as a way to engage the community on these very difficult issues.
So I'll add to that, in two strands, right? And so when I was a teacher, when I got kids' tests back, I couldn't be mad at kids if I only taught one way and they didn't learn it, right? Because I had all different kinds of learners in my room, and I had children who had all different kinds of influences in that room, right? And so, like, the two strands of it, there should be multiple voices, because it speaks about trust. Yeah, if an officer comes and asks me, hey, give me some feedback, I don't know that I'm going to do that. So figuring out the multiple people who can be starting that conversation, leading that conversation, such that there can be a more trustful dialogue is really important, but also multiple strategies, right, and multiple access points. So one of the things that I really appreciate about the way that we operated with the Ferguson Commission, because we were really oriented toward putting out the people's report and not our report, is that we gave people multiple opportunities and different ways to engage. So if you came to one of our main meetings, we had less than a year to do this, or just over a year rather, and we had, and I kid you not, 60 public meetings, right? So one was that we committed to having a longer, more detailed process instead of going for efficiency, right, which is often what we value over people, right? So we had 60 fully public meetings. There were main meetings where all 15 members of the commission were present, but at those meetings, it wasn't just 10 minutes of public comment. There were also small group conversations where those were being facilitated, right, so that people were coming with very clear solutions and orientation toward a particular question. We also had a meeting that was what we call the youth speak, where literally the microphone was only given to people under the age of 25, and nobody else was allowed to speak. Public comments, small group comments, etc. And when we opened that meeting, the folks who opened that meeting were myself and Rashid Aldridge, who at 20 is the youngest member of the Ferguson Commission, right? So again, multiple voices. We also did an art speak with young people, right? So if there were none of the Ferguson Commission members there, but it was local artists, actors, drama coaches, dance teachers, helping young people express what they've been experiencing through different modalities. Like I said, public comment, we had small working group meetings, we had full commission meetings, and those working group meetings were led by not only members of the Ferguson Commission, but concerned community members who are also formal parts of that working group. So multiple opportunities and modalities for people to contribute, and those have to be led by multiple voices, so that people can find the place where it makes sense for them, and that are led by people that they trust.
And I just would add something, is that there are some organizations that are doing the groundbreaking work, but may not want to be in those formal settings, right? And that's just real. And that's out of responsibility and accountability to the member. And that's probably made on a decision that those community members have made because of their loved ones being lost, you know, and being killed by the police department. So there's some also like reality that there are some eager folks that will always show up to the meetings that you run, and they might be quite happy with whatever's said, right? But they may not push the way and give you the type of feedback that you need. And on the other hand, there are others that have to make strategic decisions outside of these formal settings. And I agree, you know, we have to think about opening up community input to not just be so-called like community leaders that oftentimes have either political or other interests with various political forces, and that's the dynamic around every police department, right, too, irrespective of the intentions of the individuals in the police department to make that department better. Thank you.
So I guess my question is mostly for Brittany. In Maryland, we made a commission to investigate the police, and it's a joke. Legislators that were invited to be on it are not the same legislators that we talked to the other day, and not the people talking to us protesters. And there's a lot of comments I hear when I'm at the Maryland meetings where, oh, these protesters, some of them are smart kids, but they just don't understand how the world works. It's, yes. As people think I'm a safe person to say that kind of stuff too, so I hear a lot of things. But I identify as a protester above all else. Just complete lack of respect for what we want done. How, I assume that you dealt with that too. How did you handle it?
How did I handle it?
I mean, just trying to get people who are in charge and making decisions to listen to the protesters. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the culture, the police need to change. But there's a lot of bureaucratic culture that needs to change too. And I just don't understand what to do.
No, that is really critical. I will say, and I appreciate that question, I will say that there were some advantages we had in St. Louis over what you're describing in Baltimore that were embedded in the structure. One is that we had no current elected officials on the commission, right? Because it was conflict of interest pretty obvious. Two is that we were co-chaired by an African American pastor who is a known protester, and a white businessman who had a previous relationship but made a very clear commitment that we were not going to be an ineffective rights commission, right? And like read all the books, had all the conversations with people who remember the current commission and all of the ineffective task forces that were created to placate people, and made a very clear determination that that was not what we were going to be about. And so the structure, some of the structure that I just described was created specifically in the antithesis to how those things went. We also had, I would say, about 4 active protesters on the 60-person commission and other people who were allies, which was important. And so there were a couple of things that happened, right? So you asked me how we dealt with it. One of the things was that meant that our presence on the commission helped us to help the commission respond when the meetings got protested, right? So like, I would know ahead of time that they were going to come to the meeting, and so I'd be telling commissioners, like, we're not going to shut it down, we're not going to kick them out, right? This is an expression of democracy. People are going to engage. Are we going to try to like maintain order? Of course. But especially given where our community was, people needed that catharsis, and that was the only avenue that a lot of people could have had, right? And so we had to allow people that space. I also personally made a commitment to never stop protesting just because I was on the commission, right, or at the table. And I was very clear about that publicly. I was also clear about that privately with people that I was protesting with, right? So like, before I said yes to any of this stuff, myself and other protesters that were on the commission had meetings that we can talk about now, right? With people saying like, are you comfortable with this, right? And you need to have you need to hear the promise from me that I'm not there to promote myself or to sell us out, right? And there were promises made, right? Like I made promises that if that is the direction that it is going in, I will leave, right? And I will suffer the consequences of that. And so seeking the permission and and giving it a commitment that I needed to honor to my fellow protesters was something that I did and other people did to make sure that we entered and maintained that space really well. Like I said, there were some things that were embedded in our structure that seemed like that is not what you guys have going on. And this is why I cannot go any place without talking about the power of protest, right? Like if that is what y'all need to be doing, that is just what y'all need to be doing.
I would have one more quick thing, and certainly I'm interested to hear about your situation. I'm not going to presume that I understand what's going on, but I would tell them when it comes to influence, people tend to be, for better or for worse, influenced by people that are like them. And so with regard to your group, you do want to try to recruit people who are similar-ish to the people in power. For example, bringing in former retired police officers and police chiefs who agree and are sympathetic with your position, and really giving them a lot of power within any time you're presenting these ideas. I know I've shared an office with a really cool organization called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and so you can tell them the name of what they're trying to do. It's a pretty hard pitch going in. If I were to go and say, hey, cops, you guys really need to consider helping legalize drugs and stop arresting people and then asset forfeiture, like cops only tend to pay attention to other cops, I found, when it comes to stuff like this. And so they're very powerful because they're current, mostly former police officers, and they go in and they're able to speak and hold a lot of power in those conversations with those people who are institutional or in power. So that's all I can suggest on that.
I'd like to thank our panel again, and I'm sorry that we've run out of time for questions. I know that our panelists will be around. Some of them for a little bit, and some of them for the whole day. Travel schedules are kind of part of the equation this afternoon, but we'll be available to talk if you have further questions. Thank you again. We can all thank them for joining us today. We're now going to break for lunch. There are box lunches available. out in the lobby, issuing orders, things such as area